Third form of the firestorm appeared before Theodore's gaze, which rose upward in a fiery spiral. Having moved his gaze to the center of the firestorm, the main character continued the narration in his thoughts, explaining that the second form is simply impossible to overcome because, according to Theodore, even gluttony is not able to devour something that does not have a physical form. However, starting from the third form, the body levitain becomes tangible. Having scrolled through all the information in his head, the main character realized that this was their only chance to take possession of this truly terrifying monster. Noticing that Theodore was about to leave the protective barrier, Alucard turned his attention to him in surprise. Seeing the main character trying to break through the shield, Sylvia screamed and called his name. Looking at his actions with incomprehension, the white-haired girl wondered where he was going and warned that it was dangerous. Grabbing Sylvia by the shoulders and stopping her, the elf told her that she would not stop Theodore, noting that in this situation everyone is powerless. While the main character continued to try to get through the protective barrier, the elf added that they had no choice but to just wait and believe in Theodore, watching from the side. Having passed through the barrier, the main character moved forward with difficulty. As he was engulfed in flames, Theodore noticed in his thoughts that he felt like he was in the underworld. Continuing to walk, Theodore thought that even if he were blessed by a water elemental, he felt that if things continued like this, his whole body would burn in the flame. Using the technique, the main character enveloped himself in a layer of umber water. According to Theodore, umber waters are not subject to physical influence, so it can withstand the heat. Noticing something behind, the main character shifted his gaze. A huge wave of fire was approaching Theodore. At that moment he wondered that if water can overcome physical laws, does this mean that fire can do the same? Trying to stay on his feet, the main character suggested that perhaps he could take 8 more steps. But for him, with each step he took, the hellish flames became stronger. Covering himself with his hands from the heat, Theodore wondered why the Lord of the White Tower was not with them in such a situation. Meanwhile, the Lord of the White Tower watched the battle while sitting on a stone. Sensing someone's presence, the Lord of the White Tower became wary. Continuing to look at the flames in the distance, he turned to an unknown figure behind him, saying that it seemed that the battle with Levitain had moved to the next stage and that it would be good if this battle did not cause as many casualties as Melter once suffered. Recalling the past, the Lord of the White Tower said that in the last war the Empire lost 2 of its 7 swords, adding that the 3rd and 6th were both formidable opponents. According to the Lord of the White Tower, 15 years have passed since those events, noting that time is so fleeting. Sitting back on the stone, the Lord of the White Tower turned to the mysterious figure behind him, asking him if he would like to show himself, while calling the figure a sword master, warning that if he took one more step, the Lord of the White Tower would no longer sit silently. The mysterious masked and hooded figure said nothing and ignored the warning said earlier by the Lord of the White Tower. The masked man crept closer to him from behind. Taking out his blade and scabbard, the masked man attacked the Lord of the White Tower with a cutting blow, but he managed to dodge. Seeing this, the masked man was convinced that this grandfather was indeed the Lord of the White Tower. Turning his gaze to him, the mysterious masked man asked him when he noticed his presence. Without answering the hooded man's question, the Lord of the White Tower asked a counter question, wondering which of the 7 swords of the Empire he was, the 3rd or 6th. Staring intently at the Lord of the White Tower, the mysterious masked man questioned whether all sword masters must be imperial, adding that he might just be a sword master passing by. It didn't take long for a counter question from the Lord of the White Tower to come, saying that it was he who released the monster. Still standing with his back to the Lord of the White Tower, the masked man stated that he had no idea what the Lord of the White Tower was talking about. Removing his hat, the Lord of the White Tower said that exactly at the moment of their delegation's arrival, the masked man unleashed a monster and infiltrated Elfheim, and that through the actions of the creature, he sniffed out gaps in the defense network, adding that the masked man's goal was to kill the High Elves. The masked man stood in a fighting stance and reached for the blade, repeating that he has no idea what the Lord of the White Tower is talking about, adding that if everything he said about him were true, he really thinks that the masked man is so simple, showed his cards. Drawing his blade, the masked man stated that there were easier ways to solve problems, adding that he would therefore die here and now. Standing opposite each other in fighting stances, the masked man said that he had heard rumors about the Lord of the White Tower, which said that he was a fugitive who would not hesitate to turn his back on the battlefield, adding that he himself had once said that combat is not his specialty. Looking at the hooded man, the Lord of the White Tower stated that, in general, the Lord of the White Tower could not say that he was wrong, to which the masked man, completely exposing his blade, lunged and swung his sword, wished death to the Lord of the White Tower. Slowly returning the blade to its sheath, the masked man gloated, saying that he was not even able to dodge his attack. Confirming his hypotheses, the masked man stated that, as he thought, the Lord of the White Tower made a useless opponent. Having fully returned the blade to its sheath, the masked man felt pain and fell to his knees in front of the Lord of the White Tower, groaning in pain. Not a little surprised, the masked man asked himself a question, not understanding where all these wounds on his body came from. Continuing to think, he wondered if the Lord of the White Tower had used spatial magic to switch places with him. Writhing in pain and anger, the hooded man shouted at him, asking what kind of dirty tricks he used. With a calm expression on his face, the Lord of the White Tower revealed that, as he said, his magic is based on space and time, adding that battles are not his specialty, as he already said. Holding his wounds with his hand, the masked man said that he never considered himself worse than others. Sharply removing the blade from its sheath, the masked man blocked the blow of the Lord of the White Tower, saying, "Don't turn up your nose." Using his strength, the Lord of the White Tower counterattacked his enemy, after which he flew several meters away from a powerful impulse. Adjusting his hat, the Lord of the White Tower stated that he wanted to hear the names of those who sent the hooded man here and ordered the release of the monster from his lips, adding that until then, he would dream of death. A powerful explosion was heard in the thick of the forest. Baring his teeth, the protagonist thought that umbra fluidization was absolutely useless. Trying to stay on his feet, continuing to think, Theodore noted that, apparently, the flame affects not just the physical body, adding that it is capable of burning everything, no matter what space it is in. A small cloud of a fiery sphere could be seen near his face. Directing his hand towards him, Theodore froze in one position. From the colossally powerful streams of aura, the main character screamed. Frightened, Sylvia tried to call out to him. Falling to his knees, he noted the futility, saying that he could not get any closer. Beside himself with rage, Theodore thought that if he took even a step, his whole body would turn to ashes in a second. With a stern look, the protagonist noted that this was his limit. Drawing attention to the fiery cloud of aura, Theodore spoke about the beginning of the reality of heroes overcoming the fear of death and those who rush into battle without knowing the outcome, adding that this is a wall that someone like him cannot cross. An image of a monster appeared in his head, with a red glow emanating from its eye. Leaning on his knee and thinking about the fear of death, the main character stated that he had already overcome it once. With a worried expression on her face, turning to Theodore, Sylvia asked him to grow over it and just come back. At that moment, Alucard asked to leave the main character, asking if Sylvia wanted to intervene. Looking at Theodore, he begged him to remember the countless fallen who gave their lives for a leader. Baring his teeth, the main character froze in one position. Further, Sylvia reported on the time of the battle with one of the 7 sins, pride, again asking him to remember the determination that he showed then. Horrified, the guy in the hat wondered if the guys were crazy, noting that if they took even the slightest step they could die, asking Theodore to stop. Sylvia's face was shrouded in anxiety and genuine fear the moment she turned to the main character. Continuing his way, Theodore thought that he still had a little time left. His face was charred due to incredibly powerful gusts of flame. The protagonist's hand was directed towards the magical artifact. Opening his mouth, Gluttony said that he was tired of waiting. Clenching his fist, Theodore asked him to deal with it. Lowering his gaze, turning to the magical grimoire, the main character again asked to absorb it. Gluttony noted that he was not chilling. Absorbing the artifact, the magical grimoire, calling him a pathetic worm, said that resistance was useless. Bursts of powerful aura were visible from his mouth. Barely standing on his feet, the main character watched the endless explosions. His excited gaze was caught by a bright glow. Wary in his thoughts, he noted that their opponent was kicking until the very end, wondering if he couldn't just give up and let himself be consumed. Stretching out his hand, turning to the magical grimoire, Theodore screamed for it to consume him. Mysterious sounds were heard in the air. Having reported about Levetena, the system stated that this grimoire contained a sealed fiery kingdom, Muspelheim. The system said that during Ragnarok, the great magician Surtur, with the help of a grimoire, released the powers of Muspelheim and turned the world tree into ashes with its flame, noting that as a result of this he was also turned to ashes, and the grimoire, which had lost its owner, closed his eyes and quietly waited for the end. Further, the system reported that the class of the item was legendary, adding that after absorption, the affinity with fire magic would increase to its maximum, and the magical power spent on using fire spells would be halved. The system stated that damage from fire spells lower than the owner's level will be ignored, after which, the system reported that damage from fire spells higher than the owner's level would be reduced by half, adding that after absorption, Theodore would have access to the Muspelheim ring, and also, he would be able to gradually begin to use the flames of Muspelheim. A bright burst of flame was visible in the sky. Because of this, a cloud of smoke hung over the thick of the forest. Raising his hand, Alucard tried to find out what just happened, noting that he couldn't believe his eyes. Looking at the mutilated protagonist, he could not believe that he had actually defeated Levetane alone. Lowering his head, Theodore tried to catch his breath. Turning to him, Sylvia tried to find out if he was okay. Enveloped in bright flames, the main character screamed in terrible pain. Running up to him, she wondered what had happened to him, noting that flames suddenly began to emanate from his body, asking the elves to do something. Crouching next to her, she asked Theodore to hold on, using an icy touch. With a frightened expression on her face, Sylvia could not understand why the flames did not subside. Exhausted groans came from the protagonist's mouth. Turning to Elmara, Sylvia prayed to her to heal him. Turning his head to Elmara, Alucard again asked her to heal Theodore, noting that if the offering was not enough, then he would tell him everything beyond what he wanted. But later, wary, Elmare reported that he had extinguished the enemy of this world, the flame of disaster, adding that he did not need any offering. Elmer said that's all he can do for him. A powerful radiance appeared before the children's eyes, after which the main character took a deep breath. Overjoyed, Sylvia hugged Theodore, hugging him to her with all her might. With tears in her eyes, she wondered if the main character would be okay, begging him to wake up and say that he was okay. Pressing herself against his shoulder, Sylvia again asked him to do it. Suddenly, Theodore put his hand on her head. With a cry, Sylvia wondered if he was okay. Thick smoke continued to emanate from the depths of the forest. After reporting that this was the case, the protagonist thanked her, asking what happened to Lavatine. Sylvia stated that she did not know how Theodore managed to defeat him, thanking him for the fact that their enemy had completely disappeared. Looking at his hand, the main character thought that the magical grimoire managed to absorb him, adding that if not for him, they would not have had a chance to win this battle. Turning her attention to Theodore, who was sitting on the ground, Elmer reported that she had expelled all the remaining flames from him, noting that she could not get rid of the powers she had given him, which is why he would need to take care of them himself. Smiling, Theodore thanked her, saying that it was an honor to receive her help. Bowing her head, Elmer said that she would never have thought that she would meet creatures of mythical times, and even two at once, thinking that it was quite entertaining. Looking at the dying flames, Sylvia was glad that everything was over. Agreeing, Theodore noted that he did not know how, not completely believing it. Leaning on his arm, in his thoughts, the main character said that if he had not taken that one step, then the entire continent, including this place, would have turned into a living hell, stating that the battle with the legendary grimoire was truly merciless. After which, raising his hand, he tried to hide from the sun's rays. Turning his attention to his hand, Theodore thought about the ring of Muspelheim. Rejoicing, Erisa said that while she was coming here, she thought that she was about to die, asking the guys to return. Looking at Erisa, who laughed, the main character tried to find out where she was. Stating that it didn't matter now, Erisa wondered if Theodore had gotten the better of Lavatine, suggesting that the boys go back and celebrate properly. In the evening sky, one could see the sun gradually setting into the sunset. The guy in the red hat said that he knew about this only from hearsay, noting that being here now, he was more amazed. Looking at the surprised Theodore, he asked him not to pretend, adding that he had defeated Lavatine by withstanding this impossible heat, noting that they could not take a single step. Turning his head, the main character heard the guy in the hat try to find out if this was the ability that the national treasure gives. Smiling, Theodore stated that this was true, noting that without Umra he would never have been able to get close to Levitain. In his thoughts, Theodore revealed that this was only partly true. Recalling how he gradually approached the cloud of powerful aura, the main character reported that without Umbra's ability to reproduce, he would have died before even approaching Levitain, adding that Umbra significantly helped in destroying Levitain's body. Further, Theodore stated that in this way he covered up the existence of his ace in the hole, which was gluttony. Looking ahead, he wondered if he had said that he had destroyed it with the power of Umbra, telling him that if he was being picky, it wasn't entirely a lie. Turning his head, the guy in the hat wondered who came to them. From what he saw, the protagonist's face was shrouded in bewilderment and shock. The Lord of the Tower appeared before his eyes, from whom Theodore tried to find out if he was okay by asking about the blood. Putting his hand in his side pocket, the Lord of the Tower asked not to be afraid, noting that the blood was not his. Next, turning to Philip, he asked him to take it. A dark mask was visible in his hand. Holding it out, the Lord of the Tower said that it was an assassin's mask, suggesting that it belonged to one of the 7 swords. After handing over the mask, the Lord of the Tower asked Philip to find a way to track its owner, adding that it was someone with an aura capable of hiding, which is why he asked him to approach this task carefully. Confused, Philip said that he would carry out his instructions. Folding her hands, asking to wait, Erisa wondered if the owner of the tower said that the assassin sent from the capital, asking if he was sure about it. Smirking, the Lord of the Tower stated that he thought so, after which, Erisa tried to find out who his target was. The Lord of the Tower assumed that she had guessed it herself. With an angry expression on her face, Erisa said that they were the Imperial Pitiful Worms, not understanding how they dared to attack their children. With a stern look, the Tower Lord noted that he wanted to kill him, adding that chasing an assassin and constantly thinking about the High Elves was not easy. An image of a knight appeared in his head, whose hands were chained to weapons. The Lord of the Tower reported that he managed to reward him with a couple of blows, noting that it was difficult to keep track of the enemy in an area full of cover. Placing her hand on her face, Erisa said that she was still grateful, telling about an assassin who was able to deceive her parents' eyes, adding that if there were no Lord of the Tower, the children could have been in danger. Declaring that it was not worth it, the Lord of the Tower said that he was simply behaving as befits good neighbors. Looking at the guys leading the dialogue, the main character was mired in his thoughts. Eris wondered if this was true, saying that if he said so, then they should also be friendly in return. In his thoughts, Theodore stated that it had not yet been confirmed that the Andra Empire was behind this, adding that it was quite obvious. With a thoughtful expression on his face, the protagonist noted that attempting to burn down the forest with the help of Levitain and killing the High Elves were impressive crimes. After which, seeing Vince in front of her, Erisa notified him of his arrival. Putting his hands in his pockets, The Lord of the Tower tried to find out about the successes. Vince said that everything happened as the Lord of the Tower said. Bowing his head, he asked someone to leave. Behind him could be seen a pair of strangers whose hands were shackled. Looking at one of the prisoners, Vince said that they had already received testimony from them, saying that they were hired by some man in a black mask, and they did not know what they were transporting, adding that there was nothing more to find out, not even under torture. Turning to Vince, who was standing next to him, the Lord of the Tower said that this was pointless. After which, Vince asked if he needed to take care of them. Screaming, the frightened prisoners began to beg for mercy, noting that they knew nothing and were simply following the orders of the man in the black mask. Baring his teeth, the Lord of the Tower was lost in his thoughts. Turning his head to Erisa, he tried to find out how criminals were punished in Elfheim. Erisa told him about lifelong work in the mines, suggesting that he employ the prisoners as hunters or harvesters. Looking at the surprised Erisa, the Lord of the Tower said that in that case, they would do so. Laughing, Erisa asked what was the matter, noting that he was not even 100 years old, but he was already so perceptive. Agreeing, Erisa stated that she would not reject such a gift. Her gaze fell on the lake next to them. Further, she proposed sending the prisoners back. The girl sitting next to the main character expressed her gratitude to him in every possible way. In his thoughts, Theodore said that after the battle with Levitane, the delegation took several days to rest, and most of the magicians who took part in the battle recovered very quickly, adding that after everything that happened, he was seriously tired. Sylvia appeared in front of the confused protagonist. Continuing his thoughts, he noted that because Alina took such good care of him, he was able to quickly replenish his energy. Looking at the indignant Sylvia, Theodore thought that something had changed. Watching the guy's conversation, he said that the elves had become friendlier towards the members of the delegation. The main character noted that it was impossible to say that they were rude before, adding that their cold eyes now look warmer. After which, Theodore said that something had changed in him as well. Lowering its gaze, the creature asked the main character to stop. Stretching out his hand, he called Theodore a great person. Theodore wondered if he was talking to him. With a slight smile on his face, the creature asked for forgiveness for last time and thanked the main character for protecting the forest and his family. Averting his gaze, Theodore smiled. Looking at the leaning creature, the main character noted that he was rude when they first met, adding that he would like to apologize for this. Bowing its head, the creature said that it did too. Raising his gaze, Theodore suggested that we settle this. Spreading his arms in different directions, he addressed the delegation members, noting that if they are ready, then it's time to leave. Smiling, he said that as their fathers had said, he proposed to gather at a feast. A mysterious magical seal was visible near the entrance. Looking at her, the man wondered if it was the same portal as last time, asking if they should just go through it. After reporting that this was the case, the elf noted that only this time the road leads to another place, adding that they should enter, figuring that it was better to experience it for themselves rather than listen to her explanation. Entering the portal, he discovered powerful streams of radiance. Once inside the portal, the main character suggested that it could be mountains. After which, turning to him, Sylvia asked him to look here. A mountain appeared before their eyes, which was shrouded in snow. Horrified in his thoughts, Theodore tried to find out how high they were. Smirking, the Lord of the Tower stated that they were at an altitude of 10 kilometers and 824 meters to be more precise, adding that without the powers of the World Tree, they would have frozen to death. Looking forward, he said that even breathing would become difficult, noting that they would not suffer from this. From what he heard, the main character was shocked, suggesting that the place. Interrupting him, the Lord of the Tower said that this was so. Smirking, the elf stated that it was one of his branches, saying that this was a place that they could not enter without their permission. Looking around, Theodore tried to find out if there was a branch of the World Tree here, not believing that it was so huge. Leaning on the fence, the elf declared that the entrance was there. Laughing, Eris wondered if they thought they were a little late, noting that everyone was waiting for them. Rejoicing, the main character said that he understood where she was. Asking to go, Erisa stated that they had prepared a lot of goodies. With a smile on her face, the elf said that today's feast was not in honor of their states, but to honor the saviors of the forest, asking the guys to forget about their status and sit anywhere. Taken aback, the main character tried to object. Interrupting him, the elf asked him not to be stubborn, noting that from now on he could consider them friends. After which, the guys raised their glasses. Standing at the head of the feast, Edwy said that now that everyone had gathered, they could begin the celebration. Looking at the smiling Theodore, Edwin proposed to raise a toast to their ancestors who blessed this meeting, hoping that by the end of the feast they would turn from neighbors to friends. With a serious expression on his face, the Tower Lord continued to listen to him. Edwin said that he was just like them, calling them brothers. The elves' faces were filled with joy. Edwin continued, saying that the guys who saved them from the disaster would, in turn, also respond to their call if they were in trouble. Raising his glass, Edwin proposed a toast to the prosperity of Melter and Elfheim. Having exalted him, he drank to their health. Elinor held a brown bottle in her hands. She called Theodore and asked him if he could drink some wine. The high elf was very pleased. She glowed with joy, holding wine in her hands. Elinor noted that this wine was made from grapes that were grown in her tribe, and added that it had a rich aroma and taste. The high elf noted that everyone praises the taste of this drink. Theodore Miller looked at Alina with a smile while Sylvia was shocked and chewed her food. The main character noted that he would be only too happy and asked her to pour a glass. Suddenly, the granddaughter of the Lord of the Blue Tower awkwardly ran up to him. She was holding her plate in her hands, while Alina and the main character looked at her with interest. Sylvia noted, calling the main character by name, that he had better try her meat with the spices that she herself added, and advertised her dish, saying that it was much better than any wine, and the taste was simply amazing. Sylvia put a piece of meat on her fork and began to pull it towards Miller's mouth as he laughed awkwardly, and the high elf watched in silence. Theodore noted that in this case he would not mind trying her dish. Sylvia smiled and noted that her meat was right in front of him, and added that it was still hot, so let the main character be more careful. The high elf looked at all this with a grin. She noted, calling on God, that apparently human children had not yet tried their elven wine, and added that in fact this was logical, because children were unlikely to be able to understand the full depth of taste of their alcohol, which was straight from the elven tribe. The granddaughter of the Lord of the Blue Tower was very embarrassed, and looked at Alina and Theodore Miller, not understanding. She shouted and asked who the elvish woman was calling a child, and noted, telling her to know that she was a respected adult woman who had gone through a coming-of-age ceremony this year. Sylvia snatched the bottle of wine from the high elf's hands as she flinched in surprise. The granddaughter of the Lord of the Blue Tower told her to give her this bottle, and added that it would show them all how mature she was. Sylvia was filled with rage. She opened the bottle of wine in one motion, while Theodore looked at her in horror and Sylvia calmly. Theodore shouted for Sylvia to slow down, and added that the taste of wine could depend on the vessel. Sylvia's eyes watered at such injustice, but he swallowed the wine furiously. The granddaughter of the head of the Blue Tower drank the entire bottle of elven wine to the bottom, and threw the empty bottle over her head while others laughed at her. Someone noted, calling Sylvia by name, that you couldn't tell from her that she knew how to drink, and another added with a laugh that they should place bets on who would drink the most elven wine. Sylvia continued to hold the empty bottle of wine above her head. She screamed, demanding another bottle, while others laughed at her and supported her. One of the guys noted that Sylvia was holding up well. The elder stood and drank wine from a glass. He looked at the children who screamed loudly. Someone started approaching the man from behind. The girl noted, asking why the elder of the elves stood alone during such a luxurious feast for the whole world. The elder turned away from such a spectacle, and Arisa began to approach him with a grin. She asked him why he needed this mask, and added that he really thought that some kind of masquerade would be held here. The elder threw his head back and began to sip his wine. The man noted that this was personal. The girl walked to the railing of the second floor and looked down at the noise, where Sylvia was getting drunk and everyone was supporting her, while the elder looked at Arisa. Higher Arisa asked if he could show this, and noted that he should at least say why. Arisa asked the man if he knew that he was not one of those who would not leave a secret undisclosed. The elder judged his eyes and looked at the girl as she looked at him dumbfounded. He noted that everything is actually very obvious. Arisa asked him again. The girl looked at the elder and talked to him while Sylvia was angry. Arisa noted and asked to listen to her that even though she has the face of a child, she is still about 100 years old, and noted that in that case they would. The granddaughter of the head of the Blue Tower shouted at the main character. She noted that she was tired of all this. Arisa and the elder looked in the direction of the screams in surprise. Sylvia was angry and trembling with fear. She lowered her eyes. The granddaughter of the head of the Blue Tower noted that Miller every day is either with the master of the Red Tower, or always with some other girl. She shuddered and noted that she was tired of all this. Theodore looked awkwardly at the girl, piercing his gaze. He noted that it seemed to him that Sylvia was already very drunk, and added that it was time for them to stop. Sylvia looked angrily at the main character. Her eyes were already beginning to break between themselves. She asked him again and clarified very dissatisfiedly that he really considers her a child just like everyone else, adding that she is really a child who is not able to drink wine. The Blue Tower head's granddaughter's eyes watered, and her eyelids gradually closed. She noted that Theodore Miller should hold on because she was going to drink a lot of wine. Sylvia fell with her head on the table with a crash, while Theodore became scared because of her and called the girl's name. Theodore sighed with a grin. Sylvia fell asleep sweetly, snoring quietly, saying something under her breath with displeasure. Miller grinned and noted that the girl drank wine so furiously, and this is the result she got. Theodore and the high elf Alina looked at the thick fog. The main character noted that no matter how many times he saw this landscape, it still took his breath away, and added that she couldn't even dream of feasting in such a place, and noted that he didn't even think about it, dared even to dream. The elf and the main character both enjoyed the view. Alina noted that does the main character know that when she was here for the first time, she felt the same as Theodore now. The high elf smiled warmly, looking into the distance. She noted that although she also had large trees at home, they were not so huge that the clouds passed. Theodore smiled and looked at Alina. He noted, "Stop and think about it, sitting here right in the clouds," and added that it was like he was in a dream. Elinor laughed affectionately and cheerfully and asked if he really thought that way. Elinor looked up while the protagonist looked straight at her. The elf noted, calling Theodore by name, and asked him if he would go somewhere with her. Elinor looked at Miller with a calm gaze. She noted that she would like to show him some places where only the two of them would be. Elinor began to walk away straight away while Theodore Miller looked straight after her. He shouted that he, of course, agreed to go with her. Elinor asked him to follow him, and noted that he should not lag behind by more than 3 steps. In silence, the high elf and the main character walked somewhere while Theodore examined the area around him with interest. Miller was embarrassed. He looked straight. In his thoughts, the main character noted that he had a feeling that in a split second the space where they were had changed, and added, asking himself, is Lady Elinor really the same as the master of the broken pearl of the tower, who has spatial magic? Theodore looked straight at the high elf awkwardly, sweat dripping from his face. He asked Elinor how they managed to move to another place so quickly. Elinor smiled happily and answered him as he looked at her. In her thoughts, she noted that this was the privilege of the high elves. The elf noted that since they are high elves, who are moving more and more towards the world tree, their volume of produced magic increases several times, and added that all this is produced thanks to their ancestors. Elinor continued to talk about how, thanks to this, high elves could jump over certain distances without gates or holes, and was pleased to note that this was very convenient. Theodore and the elf scattered cheerfully together. Theodore noted that he then understood why this was so, and added that this immediately reminded him of the master of the Pearl Tower. Elinor laughingly noted that one could say that she and this master work almost according to general principles. The elf stopped laughing and looked seriously at the main character. She noted that it was time for them to go. Elinor extended her hand in front, thereby introducing Theodore Miller to a new place while he looked at him in surprise. Miller was almost speechless. He asked Lady Elinor what this place was to which she had led him. Elinor and the main character crossed the wooden bridge. Elinor replied to Miller, saying that this is precisely the space that even high elves, like her, cannot enter without permission, and added that this place is called the Source of Wisdom. Elinor smiled cheerfully and looked straight at the main character. She addressed him by name, and noted that he was the second person in the history of the elves to be recognized as a guest here. Miller looked up in surprise while Elinor looked straight ahead. The main character asked the high elf if this hut really was the source of wisdom. The high elf replied that this was exactly the case, and added that they brought him here because this is what the sage had told them to do. Theodore looked straight into Elinor's eyes with shock. The elf continued to say that this sage was the first person to enter the source of wisdom, and added that it was a great person who made contracts with all 4 kings of the elements at once. Hershheim sat contentedly and signed the drink while the earth element was behind him. The high elf noted that the great elemental master Almond Hershheim once said that he left a message for Theodore Miller inside this hut. Miller commented and asked Elinor that Almond Hershheim himself really asked to do this. Elinor remembered the prophecy where a man was running away from a monster. Elphica noted that she was quoting a quote that the master then said, "Time will pass and the 6th Mukvi will open its eyes, and then long-forgotten creatures will wake up from a long sleep," and added that 2 great nations will come together and bring a great catastrophe to the world. The girl noted that, however, there is nothing to be afraid of, since the guest who will bring the sparks together is a catastrophe, and added, and before that, she continued to quote the master, "Please direct him here." The main character became wary and wary. He asked Elinor if this was all a prediction. Elinor looked at Miller slyly. She noted that this was exactly the case, and added that that was all she could say to Theodore. Elvin and Miller looked at the endless steps that led to the gate. The high elven noted that everything else was behind this door, and added that there he would understand everything else. Miller looked at the door, dumbfounded, his eyes narrowed. In his thoughts he noted that the 6th movie, he had endured a short pause, from the birth of Lady Elinor M until the appearance of Rabate, and added that to think that there was someone who was capable of something like that, to foresee such a thing. The eyes of the main character began to look more and more closely at the door. He continued to note in his thoughts that even if Mordek is an elemental master, this does not change the fact that he is just an ordinary person. Miller asked himself, surprised at such a result, how could he have foreseen the future ones then? Theodore Miller looked at High Elf Elinor, who was holding her hand. Miller noted that he understood everything, and added that he would then go inside and find out about everything, especially why Miedel himself called him here. The main character smiled. He added that he would return quickly, so let Elinor wait a little for him. Theodore Miller began to walk up the stairs with funny steps straight to the door of the hut while Elinor looked at him. The high elf clasped her hands together with a smile. She noted that of course she would wait for him, and added that she would wait as long as necessary. The main character had already gotten up and grabbed the door handle. He began to pull it towards himself. Miller, with his head held high, walked straight into the spatial dimension of the former master of the 4 elements. In his thoughts, he noted that there were also spatial gates, and more how many of them there were on his way, but he added that in any case he would move forward. The system notified us that the main character had consumed the original book. Miller walked with a serious expression on his face and his eyes closed. The system noted that a connection is now being established with an entity called Mädel-Hersheim. The connection was established successfully. The system added that Mädel-Hersheim accepted the user's consent to communicate. The start of communication was enabled. The main character opened his eyes slightly. In front of him sat a smiling Hersheim, who was looking directly at Miller. Theodore asked him who he really was. Mädel sat calmly on a low column and looked at the main character who stood opposite him. Hersheim noted that Miller had finally arrived, and added that the guest he had been waiting for so long finally appeared. Miller looked at Mädel awkwardly. Swallowing his saliva, he asked if he really was Mädel-Hersheim, and asked him how he got here. Hersheim chuckled. He noted that he apologizes, and added that he is the true self, the self that the main character knows, and in fact he is not at all the same as he is now, and added that it would be much more accurate to think of him as about the memory imprint. Hersheim looked at the main character with a grin, while simultaneously placing his hand on his knee. He noted that Miller looked much younger than he actually imagined, and added that such a boy could really be the owner of Greed. Miller's eyes narrowed in shock. Miller didn't understand what was happening while Mädel looked at him and spoke. The man noted, asking if he could find out the main character's name. Miller stammered, saying his name was Theodore Miller. Miller looked at Hersheim puzzled, sweat running down his cheek. He did not understand who this Hersheim really was. In his thoughts, Theodore noted how he found out about his gluttony, and especially how he found out that Miller was his master. Mädel put his palm to his beard. He was still throwing grins towards the main character. The man asked the main character that he could not call him Theodore, but address him as Theodore, and added that his name was quite funny for a magician. Miller stood very close to the master of the four elements, and the glutton began to wake up. Hersheim noted, referring to Greed, how many years, how many winters, and asked him if it was really called gluttony now. Gluttony looked at Hersheim menacingly, his eyes filled with anger and surprise. He added that apparently it was Hersheim who dared to call him with just some piece of memory, and noted that this master had become much more reflective in recent times than before. Hersheim smiled kindly and chuckled while the main character and Gluttony were silent. The man noted that he was asking for forgiveness, and noted that he had foreseen the visit, and he also explained that he had no other choice but to meet him and the executor of his contract in this way. Gluttony noted displeasedly that this excuse was very weak and should have been worked on. Miller looked at these two puzzled. He did not understand anything. In his thoughts, the main character noted that it is really and how Gluttony and Mädel-Hersheim know each other. The protagonist's eyes narrowed noticeably as he looked closely at the master of the four elements. He mentally asked himself how he could know so much about Gluttony. Grim of Greed was pleased. He noted that it does not matter how he remained alive, and added that he should explain why he had been waiting for them all this time. Gluttony noted that if his answer was unconvincing, he continued to look at Hersheim. Then from that moment on, Gluttony would perceive him as an enemy. Mädel smiled and looked at the two carefully. He noted that Gluttony was still sharp-tongued, and added that he was the one who made the soul contract with his representative, and asked Gluttony if he was being too cautious now. All three remained in the same positions in which they had been all this time. Hersheim noted that he called him here to help him, and added that it was all because he thought that he was different from the other deadly sins. Gluttony asked him, dumbfounded, that he was really different. Mädel looked at him seriously. He noted that it was he, and he believed that it was gluttony that was not like the other 6 sins, and noted that he was not particularly interested in the life of this world. Hersheim added that by capturing all existing forms of life, such as pride, stopped the world itself. Gluttony interrupted him and ordered him to stop. Greed was unhappy. He noted that this spirit was really trying to threaten him, and added that Hersheim is a mythological relic. Hersheim looked menacingly at the Gluttony. He grinned gravely and noted that he was just asking politely. Gluttony noted that he talks too much. The main character watched them silently. In his thoughts, he asked himself what happened between these two, and what kind of communication style they have now. Miller continued to think and began to assume that these two were really having a quarrel now, or that Mädel was trying to expose something. Gluttony looked at the master of the four elements seriously. He noted that he would leave this case unattended, and added that only this time. Miller's hand clenched into a fist, thereby covering up his gluttony. Greed noted that he could not do anything without any need. With a sharp movement, the main character opened his hand while Hersheim sat silently. Theodore shouted that Gluttony couldn't just leave like that. Hersheim noted with a laugh that he seemed upset, and added that he was only trying to be polite towards him. Miller looked menacingly. He asked the master of the four elements why exactly he wanted to meet with someone inexperienced like Theodore Miller. The man sat and looked at Miller seriously as smoke surrounded him. He asked the main character again, inexperienced, and added who in this world calls the holder of a contract with one of the deadly sins ignorant. Hersheim noted that Theodore should not stress so much about this. He began to pierce the main character with his gaze, and he noted that the old man just wanted to help him. Hersheim looked at the vat of tea, from which strong steam was emanating. Miller asked what the reason for all this was. The man thought about it. The main character clenched his hand into a fist and looked awkwardly at the master of the four elements. He noted that he does not want to obey anyone without knowing anything. Miller added that if the master wants to help him, then he wants to ask him why and for what. Mädel looked at Miller with a serious look. He added that he now understood that their conversation with Gluttony could have confused him and asked for forgiveness. They looked at each other and did not look away until the room rose in smoke. Hersheim replied that he asked him to understand and added that there were secrets that he could not reveal to him now, and among them were secrets that were not destined to be told. Theodore asked again, secrets that cannot be told. Needle leaned back with his elbows, satisfied. He noted that yes, for example, the purpose for which the 7 deadly sins appeared in this world, and added that they left parallel traces. Miller screamed in fear. He asked again, the secrets of the 7 deadly sins. Hersheim extended his hand to Theodore, which was covered with blue frost. He noted that Miller was right. Needle did not jump on Theodore Miller. While he barely managed to place the block, the entire room was painted in blue frost. The man noted that if Theodora allows him, then he can perform such tricks. The system turned red and the error was reported several times. Miller's pass hit Needle, and everything was painted in shades of blue. The system began to recover and noted that a valid request was accepted. The system announced that the 4th seal of Gluttony had been broken. The main character's eyes narrowed greatly. The system added that Gluttony's abilities are now fully unleashed, and the user is prompted to immediately look at an information window that is associated with his characteristics. The system noted that the Gluttony Grimoire had reached rank C, and that the 4th seal of Gluttony had been broken accordingly. The system continued to note that the user could now borrow the power of the author, extracted from the original manuscript and the absorption of Gluttony. The system added that, however, if characteristics updates are performed for the author, they will not be able to be accepted again by the user. The system continued to say that the previous owners called this function overwrite. If you wish, you can change the name. The main character grabbed his heart with his hand while they looked at him. Miller reflected in his thoughts that the seal that had been forced open by Gluttony in the battle with Superbia had been removed again. But unlike the last time, this method was not recognized as unnatural. The main character asked himself how the master of the 4 elements did this. Suddenly, Hersheim sat down in his seat again and began a conversation with the completely unsettled protagonist. Needle noted that there was a trace left in Miller that the seal had been opened earlier. He added that thanks to this he had the strength to talk. The man looked at Theodore with a slight smile. He noted that he had about 5 minutes left, and added that from that moment on, the main character perceived everything like his grandfather's tricks and listened carefully. Hersheim's gaze became serious. He noted that, frankly, the main character is now in a dangerous situation, and added that it's all about Levitain, who he absorbed during the incident. The main character recalled this grimoire, which was in the form of a shark. Needle noted that the power that was gained from this grimoire, and that mysterious power from another dimension, and on top of all this, the power of artifacts, he continued to say, comparable in value to treasures, is too voluminous for 20-year days dealt with it. The main character was very wary. He asked the master of the 4 elements what exactly was the problem with all this. Hersheim grinned and examined Theodore Miller carefully. He noted that he would ask Miller a very simple question. He asked the main character what happens to a vessel if you try to put more liquid into it than it can hold. Miller froze in place, his eyes narrowed. In Miles, Theodore noted that this was deaf. Model began gesticulating with his hand. He noted that, fortunately, the meeting with him added Theodore a little time, and added that most likely Miller would be able to live peacefully for the next 2 years. Here he paused. However, Hersheim continued to say, after 3 years the body of the main hero will begin to collapse, and in 5 years he will perish. Miller couldn't believe his ears, his teeth chattering in horror as he held his finger up. Theodore objected. He said that such a recreation center could not exist. And Hersheim replied that the main character does not turn back time. Sorry, he added. Hersheim looked at Miller with some longing. He noted that instead of living a life of fighting and consuming, let the main character concentrate on developing his own skills, and added that while exploring this huge world, let him encounter a bunch of people, and at the same time expand his horizons. The smoke had already consumed more than half the room. Miller ran up to the master of the 4 elements. He shouted that Needle's advice was too abstract and asked him if he could name a more precise method. Needle grinned and replied that he couldn't, because the answer itself was already known to the main character. Miller was faced with a picture where he was collecting more and more of the book for detailed study. Hersheim noted that just like his time spent wandering and fighting, he helped him survive and grow. Miller recalled one of his fights in the past, and Hersheim continued to say that let Theodore, in the same way, without hesitation, seek difficult and exhausting paths. Hersheim began to disappear. He smiled and extended his hand to Miller. He noted finally that in the end, each magician must find his own path through the inner wasteland. Miller stood silently as white smoke filled the rest of the room, and Hersheim said in his last words that he does good luck to the young hero Miller. Miller frowned. He was unhappy. In his thoughts, he noted that the identities and goals of the other 7 sins really spoke about the world, and this truth was not something he could know yet. Theodore Miller began to leave that room. He noted in his mind that he only had 5 measly years left to live. Miller began to walk slowly and calmly towards the high elf Alina until she unexpectedly noticed him. Theodore stood in one place and looked at Alina as she began to approach him. Alina noted that Theodore had returned and called him by name. The main character was surprised at Alina and also addressed her by name. Alina questioned the main character with a smile while he was silent. She asked him if he liked their elven sanctuary. Miller remained silent and answered. The main character noted that this day made him think much more than he expected. The high elf smiled. She noted that she understood him, and after a short pause continued to say that she did not know what Miller experienced in the Fountain of Wisdom, but she was sure that it benefited him. Alina followed the main character and talked to him along the way. She said that this was the end of her role here, and added that she needed to escort the main character Theodore to the Source of Wisdom and back to the banquet hall. The elf came out, awkwardly noted that now there would be nothing more than a personal request, and asked him if he would listen to her. The elf was very worried, but she also tried to smile. She noted asking if Theodore wanted to take a little longer walk with her. Miller smiled and nodded. They began to walk together around the area where they originally came from, and Theodore noted with a smile that he agreed and that he would like to go for a walk now. Under the dome of the church, two men were engaged in a dialogue. One sadly responded understandably to the other's story, and another yuck explained that this is exactly how he failed the task. A man with brown hair stood holding his severed arm. His head let go while the others whispered to each other. The monk stood and looked out the window. He asked what about Melter. The monk's subordinate bowed his knee. He noted, turning to his master, that he was asking him to end his life. The monk silently continued to look out the window. He noted that the subordinate has no fault in this because they all impeccably carry out his orders, and this is beyond doubt, and added that the burden of this failure lies entirely on him, and there is no fault of others here. His other subordinates placed the box in front of the one who was ready to lose his life. The monk marked him to take it. The subordinate silently looked at the black object that was being pulled out of the box. He was amazed by what he saw. This is what the subordinate began to say with a sinking heart. In front of him lay a metal hand with claws. The monk noted that this prosthesis was a replacement for his lost arm, and added that once he got used to using it, his subordinate could do it in less than a year. The subordinate without an arm fell to his knees and began to bow to the monk while others looked at him. He shouted, "My lord," and the monk noted that this is a common thing for him, which is appropriate to reward a faithful servant, and added that as a warrior he understands very well how significant the loss of a hand is. The subordinate gritted his teeth. He noted that henceforth. He stood up and began to smear the bandage on his arm, his gaze menacing. He continued to say that next time he would definitely, he paused for a short time, he would kill all these despicable scum from Melter. The next day, as soon as the banquet ended, the ambassadors went to Melter's capital, Monaville. There was a huge cloud of smoke below. Looking at the main character and Sylvia, the elf asked if they were ready for the road, stating that this road would lead them to the right place. Theodore, looking at the elf, told him that he understood and thanked them for coming out to see him off. The elf happily declared that they were only too happy and wished them good luck. Theodore said with a grin on his face that it was time for them to go. Suddenly, behind a group of people, a girl loudly called out to Mr. Theodore and told them to be very careful. The hero reciprocally responded to Mrs. Alina so that she, too, should take care of herself. Theodore stated that it was definitely time for them and a strong surge of aura appeared around them. The main character said in his head that their meeting was very short and it was very bitter to part. Perhaps one day they will meet again. This story takes us to Monaville, to the reception chamber of the palace. King Kurt III said in a whisper that everyone was ready. Kurt loudly called the Lord of the Pearl Tower and ordered him to tell him what their ambassadors could please him with. The Lord of the Pearl Tower leaned before the king and said that thanks to the meeting with the natives of Elfheim, they not only tripled the amount of goods for export and import, and eased the export restrictions on artifacts by the same amount, but also acquired a timber warehouse in the Great Forest of Elfheim. In addition, we agreed to maintain trade relations between countries. The king initially smiled, and then began to clap his hands, shouting wonderfully and thanking Viscount Miller. Kurt stated that the Viscount lived up to his high reputation and that people had a high opinion of him, continuing to talk about the Viscount. The king stated that he had done great honor to the people of Melter. For the kingdom, the Viscount was one of the greatest gifts from above. Theodore, with a serious expression on his face, told the king that his majesty was exaggerating. Kurt told the main character that the results of his actions are worthy of the rank of great and commands him to temporarily assign him the rank of great, and when Theodore reaches the 6th circle, he will be declared a full-fledged great magician. Theodore thanked the king and stated that he had no objections. Kurt told them that he would reward everyone who participated in the campaign, and also organize a banquet on the occasion of their return. Shocked people who heard everything that happened in the reception chamber of the palace are very happy for Theodore, because such a young guy received the rank of great and thoughts appeared that he could become the next Lord of the Tower. Theodore, standing in the palace, said in his thoughts that he did not know what exactly made him change, because the day when he would be given the title of Lord of the Tower was not far off. The main character, returning to his room, said under his breath that he was great and that's good. But it only made him think that, apart from the titles of Lord of the Tower and Elder, Great Magician is the highest rank that a Tower Magician can receive, because it gives the right to meet with your own research team or organization, and also allows you to receive funding for research activities from the kingdom. But Theodore, looking at his wrist, did not tell the king that he had already received the 6th circle, but as soon as he informed his majesty, he would immediately become a great magician, because rank gives Theodore power, and with great power comes great responsibility. The hero continued to think with folded arms that if he became a great mage, it would be difficult for him to cross the border of the country at any time he needed. Some sounds were heard in the vastness of the palace. Vince suggested that Theodore had 5 more years. Approaching Theodore, who was sitting, Vince noted that he had completed the 6th circle and was impressed because one could say that he was walking 10 times faster than the others. Vince told the hero that the secret of his progress was gluttony. Theodore, angry, looked at the magical grimoire and agreed, after which he said in his thoughts that gluttony should be given credit for his incredible progress. But now, because of Vince, his time here is limited and despaired, thinking that there would be no other way. The hero raised his hand with gluttony and turned to him, showing that he was eavesdropping on him and wanted to discuss a lot with him and stop wasting his time. The magical grimoire does not understand what the main character is talking about, after which Theodore told him not to pretend to be a fool and said that they would follow a different question-answer pattern. The hero asked Gluttony who Mädelhersheim was. In response, Theodore can only find out what he roughly looks like, because if Mädel had not broken his level 4 seal, then Gluttony could not tell him anything. The hero, widening his eyes and opening his mouth, asked Gluttony about the 7 deadly sins. The magical grimoire fearfully informed him that they are in a different league than pride, because he only knows about this because Gluttony managed to briefly meet him face to face. Not counting pride, the rest at least at level 5 said Gluttony and stated that if Theodore wants to get more information, he will have to break the seal of the 6th circle. Theodore said in his thoughts that he would not be able to get something like this and did not think that Gluttony had any reason to force Mädel to remain silent about something. Squinting his eyes, Theodore thought that, apparently, restrictions were deliberately placed on the magical grimoire. The main character told Gluttony that he was changing the question and spoke the words of Mädel, that you can expand the boundaries of your cup, and asked Gluttony how to do this. The magical grimoire stated that there are several ways and the simplest of them is sacrifices. Age and gender do not matter and it will only take about 10 people to expand your soul. Theodore, in a rage, told Glutton that he would never do such a thing and asked what the next method was, to which Glutton replied to accumulate experience. The magical grimoire stated that it does not matter what Theodore receives as a result of good or evil deeds. The only important thing is whether his actions affect the world. If so, then the boundaries of the cup will expand. Gluttony noted with a grin that if Theodore wants, then let him solve someone's problems, or become a problem in someone's peaceful life, because the ability not to get hung up on actions, but simply to take everything for granted is what people have to define a professional. Theodore asked if there were other ways, to which Gluttony replied to continue in the same spirit and everything would work out for the main character. Theodore did not understand what he meant, to which the magical grimoire stated to hunt the originals. Gluttony told Theodore to look for the originals, whose powers he had already absorbed. As an example, Gluttony listed the Song of Battle, the Laws of Spirits and others, and told the main character that he would help expand his cup. Theodore, in confusion, turns to Gluttony with the words that he thought the boundaries of the bowl had already reached the limit, because to absorb and hunt the originals, that he poured water into the full thicket and asked the magical grimoire how this would help him. Gluttony stated that he understands his confusion, but in fact, what Theodore receives as a result of the hunt for the originals will become something like material for his cup. But that's not all. Glutton noted and said that the main character will have soul fragments. The original ones need to be absorbed, because then the boundaries of the cup can expand even further. Theodore thought in shock that absorbing soul fragments would really help him. Vince laughingly spoke words of gluttony to Theodore and stated that if Theodore decided to take the second path, Vince would give him something that would be useful. Vince extends his hand to Theodore and hands him a book, a collection of ancient magic from the Balakian edition. The system reports that it contains information about ancient peoples and Balakian magic. The magicians of those times were more knowledgeable and used magic much more effectively. The author, Vince Cadle, spent decades of his life to systematize the information. The quality and quantity of knowledge contained in this book is incomparable with what the system also reported that information about the level of knowledge was recorded. The value of the book is precious. When absorbed, it gives a person basic knowledge of the Balakian language. The system reported that this copy is an original. The author is associated with the book. There is a high probability of absorbing some personal information. Vince said with a grin that Theodore would need this book if it came to the originals and was not sure whether he would like such a gift. Theodore surprisedly told Vince that he really liked this gift and asked how to thank Vince, but Vince said that he shouldn't thank him because he finished this book thanks to Theodore. After which Vince warned the main character that hunting for the originals is not an easy path, to which Theodore agreed and stated that he would try. At the same moment, Vince interrupted Theodore's words and noted that this is not the point, because Theodore is now a hero Meltora and everything is not the same as before. Theodore looked at Vince with a surprised look and continued to listen to Vince. Vince stated that the entire kingdom would be against his departure and noted whether Theodore could persuade His Majesty. Theodore thought that His Majesty would gladly meet him halfway if he could back up his request with convincing facts, so Theodore said to himself before meeting His Majesty, taking a fork with a piece of meat in his hand. Suddenly Veronica interrupts Theodore's thoughts, simultaneously taking the fork from his hands and starting to feed the main character. Theodore is confused as to what the Lord of the Scarlet Tower is doing here. Veronica flirtatiously asks if Theodore doesn't like it when she spoon feeds him. In response, Theodore noted that that's not the point. Kurt, sitting next to him, laughed and said that it's not every day you see something like this, how Veronica feeds someone straight from a spoon and how someone refuses her. The main character, shyly, asked why everyone had gathered here. The king, in response to Theodore, told him to relax and said that he called Veronique for the comfort of the main character and to make Theodore feel at home. Continuing to laugh, Kurt asked Theodore why he asked for an audience, for a request or a wish. Theodore's face shows that he is excited. King Kurt noted that he reads people well and knows what Theodore is thinking. The hero boldly stood up and asked Kurt if he could go on a trip outside the kingdom. The king displeasedly asked Theodore if he now wanted to leave. At this time, Veronica asked Theodore if he wanted to leave the country, to which the hero answered positively. Kurt thoughtfully told Theodore that he was not completely sure of his intentions and thought that it would be better for the hero to earn such a privilege himself, because Theodore is the hero of Melter, after all, and he deserves a high title, and the hero will be provided with all possible rights and benefits. Kurt said that instead of traveling around the world, wouldn't it be better to stay and hone his skills inside the kingdom, because it is much safer here. Theodore, upset by the king's words, noted that he understood his doubts, but Theodore asked him to understand that he wanted to go on a trip. Kurt began to address Theodore, but the hero interrupted him and raised his wrist with a mark with the words that he was close to reaching the sixth circle, and all thanks to the fact that he had gained valuable experience in foreign trips and realized that outside the kingdom, Theodore's skills were much faster developed than at a desk in the library. Kurt put his hand to his chin and thoughtfully told Theodore that he was still not sure about him, because his name had become too widely known even beyond the borders of the kingdom. The hero said in his thoughts that he knew that the king would not approve of his request and it was unsafe to travel abroad without support. The king shouted to Everton and asked him to bring him something, which Everton agreed to bring. Everton took the medallion and approached Theodore. Sitting down on his knees, he held out the medallion to Theodore and declared that the gentleman should take it. Theodore incomprehensibly asked the king what it was, to which Kurt replied that it was an artifact for the self-defense of the Lord of the Yellow Tower and was not sure whether it was useful, but it was better than nothing. Kurt told the hero that when he leaves the room, he will immediately want to lock himself in his laboratory and not leave it for several months, because this is an excellent excuse to disappear. The king noted how he liked the artifact, to which Theodore stated that it was a wonderful thing, squeezing the artifact in his hand, thinking about what the king meant. Because it is natural for magicians to disappear in laboratories doing research, and His Majesty wants to hide the fact of Theodore's travel under the pretext of scientific research. But at the same time, the hero needs to be extremely careful so that he is not considered a spy or some kind of mercenary. Kurt stated that Theodore could go and that he had a lot of work ahead of him, and did not know what kind of research he was going to do, but hoped that the results would be worth it. Theodore thought that even such a privilege as taking books from the royal library is not given to everyone, the same elders, and he could not think that His Majesty would allow him access not only to the library and laboratory, but would also allow him to go beyond the borders of the kingdom. Theodore stood up from the sofa and put his hand to his chest, thanking him for the king's time. The hero thought that it was now clear to him why he was praised as one of the greatest rulers. Theodore told the king that he was leaving now, to which Kurt nodded his head. Theodore left the room, after which Kurt turned to the Lord of the Scarlet Tower that she was strange, to which Veronica did not understand anything. Kurt stated that he expected Veronica to cry and ask Theodore to take her with her, and besides, her performance had decreased. Veronica noted that maybe she wanted to go on a trip with him, to which the king asked why she remained silent. In response, Veronica said that if she argues with him, she will cause a lot of problems, and if this happens, she will get tired too quickly and immediately rush home, to which Kurt looked at her incomprehensibly. Veronica said with a smile that when Theodore returns next time, most likely she will no longer be able to call him a boy. A brightly shining sun could be seen in the desert. There were too many carts traveling through the desert. The coachman said that they were very lucky that the magician was with them, to which Theodore repeated the word lucky. The coachman replied that he managed to jump in with them at the last moment, and besides, he got a VIP carriage. Looking at the road, the coachman noted that for a long time they could not find at least one magician for such a long trip, but then Theodore came, because what is this if not luck? The hero said with a grin that the coachman was right. In response, he noted that only Theodore the Younger, the brother of the hero of Allmelter, deigned to join them, because this was truly great luck. After these words, Theodore laughed and agreed with this. The hero thought that he had doubts at first, but did not expect that artifact to work after looking at the artifact. The system reports that this artifact was created by an unknown master during unsuccessful experiments. Has the shape of a ball, this artifact allows the owner to slightly change his appearance in order to hide his identity. The system also reported that the artifact, when worn, activates on its own. If the magic is destroyed, it self-destructs, cannot be found using detection magic. However, it is impossible to hide its presence when the magic is activated. The system noted that the artifact class is valuable and when absorbed, it greatly increases the magic power. After absorption, it will take 18 hours to fully assimilate. After absorption, your understanding of transformation magic will increase. Theodore thought that he was now not the hero Theodore, but a simple Theo, a magician who had reached the fourth circle, who went to Kargas to meet distant relatives, knowing that he should have chosen a better name. But the teacher said that the name should sound ridiculous, and he hopes he knows about what does he say. Sighing, Theodore continued to think that they were unlikely to see him soon, or the same Sylvia, with her clumsy, but such a gentle and pleasant character, or the kind Veronica, whom the truth sometimes gets carried away in playfulness. Tired Theodore thought that he would quickly return to them, but abruptly abandoned these thoughts, saying it was not time to become limp. The hero put his hand under Pancho and pulled out a book from there, after which he opened it. Theodore, in his thoughts, said that the book into which the teacher put his sweat, blood and tears was called Pandecton Archaic Magic, Balakian edition. The hero thought and said that he had been reading the book for several days, but only understood half of it. But on the other hand, reading books is his joy, because you can immerse yourself in the study of knowledge hitherto unknown to you. And when you absorb this knowledge, you need to make efforts to understand it, but at the same time you get rid of all unnecessary thoughts, which really helps not to sour. The coachman stopped the cart and shouted that they would spend the night here. In the foggy desert, the coachman ordered the mercenaries to stand guard while they set up tents, and to occupy the rest with tents and make a fire, after which they would all eat together. The soup was boiling on the fire. Theodore said that it was colder today than when the sun was just setting. In response, the coachman noted that there are no trees or any other vegetation here, so it will be cold. Raising his voice, the coachman said that during the day it was really hot here, but at sunset it became more or less tolerable. Theodore said that it would not be better to set off after sunset. After all, horses get tired quickly during the day, to which the coachman, smiling, noted that this is not a bad idea, but the catch here is that they are not the only ones who like to walk around at night. For example, the same sandworms and ants, because they move out immediately after dusk when the sand is getting colder. Theodore scooped a spoon into the soup and drank it, after which he stated that he did not think that vegetable soup and fried meat would be so delicious. Theodore, sensing something was wrong, stood up and wondered why his head was buzzing, because it didn't look like assassins. The coachman was surprised by what he saw and asked the hero whether he liked the food or not. Theodore turned around with widened eyes and said just that in his thoughts. A crowd of bandits on camels could be seen in the distance, after which Theodore shouted bandits. A dark-haired young man dressed in white clothes stood in the middle of a desert area under a dark night sky. Dust and sand rose all around from the loud clatter of camels, on which sat armed men with eyes glowing with red light. Two young men froze in fear when they saw the robbers in front of them. A man in a light beige cloak raised his hand and shouted loudly for all the people to line up in a row, and the archers took charge of the wooden fences and put out the fire. Theodore silently observed the situation as black smoke flew into his face. The main character looked at the robbers and thought that among them there were at least 10 Ori users, and one of them, who was most likely their leader, was not inferior to Rebecca in swordsmanship. Theodore pulled the cloth over his mouth and put the headdress on his head, thinking that he should not reveal his identity, despite the fact that the young man did not know who these people were and what they wanted. Putting a metal mask over his eyes, Theodore came to the conclusion that now he needed to concentrate, and for the sake of preserving the legend, he could not use magic above the fourth circle. The main character took the collar of his clothes off his mouth and grinned, asking himself if he should say hello now.